Welcome to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm drkerryann Williams, and on today's show, we're going to be hearing from Jasmine Akinsulire. She's a doctoral student at William James College. She's also the founder of Global Autism Consultant, and today she's going to be talking with us about parenting tips. So keep listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm drkerryann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing here in Massachusetts, and this is a talk show that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community. So, throughout the show, you can participate. You can call in at 617-238-7111. You can also follow along live on Facebook. We're going to be streaming on the page heat981fm.com on Facebook. So you can follow us along there, drop a comment, say hello, ask a question, and join our conversation today. And guys, today we're talking about parenting tips. And I have with me Jasmine Akinsulire. I keep getting the pronunciation incorrectly.
You did a good job.
Akinsulire. Yes.
It's
Okay.
close.
Jasmine Akinsulire, she has a master's degree in psychology. She's currently in her last semester of a doctoral program at William James College. And she is also the founder of Global Autism Consultant. And as an autism parent consultant, she has worked with a variety of children, adolescents, and families both here and abroad. She's worked in many different settings, such as clinics, hospitals, schools, emergency rooms, and in homes. And Jasmine works to help parents go from overwhelmed to feeling more confident in their abilities. She is a mom to a 4-year-old son, and she knows that parenting is not just about strategies, but also doing the work within ourselves and working on our mindset as parents. So welcome to the show, Jasmine.
Thank you so much. Hello, happy Sunday. I'm so excited to be with you, Dr. Carrie and everyone.
And you guys, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I kind of have a little bit of a partnership with William James College, and so I enjoy having their scholars coming on my show. I hope to have some more coming on this summer. So Jasmine, tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what led up to your current work as a doctoral student.
Yes, thank you. So currently, I'm finishing my last semester at William James College. I'm super excited to continue this journey and work towards becoming a psychologist. But I've had years ago, I realized that parents all over and, in this country, but all over in general, they struggle with, you know, realizing that parenting is not just about the tips and tricks, it's about the mindset and doing the work within. And so I just became so passionate about this topic. And I just want to help as many families as possible across the world. And so in my school, I started, concentrating in the children and families program. And so I over the years, I've been able to work in a variety of settings, and I'm very passionate about this. And I'm so happy to be here with you, and I'm excited to talk about this topic. And I just love working with children, adolescents, and families. I love doing this work because we're not just working with the children, but we're working with the parents.
Yeah, exactly. And now your background is pretty kind of rich and diverse. I mean, you've worked at an OCD clinic as well, right? So you've had experience knowing how to treat anxiety disorders and obsessive compulsive disorder. You've also done like a fellowship, like an APA fellowship. What was that fellowship about?
Yeah, so right now I'm finishing up my APA internship, and I'm working with DECO. It's a agency in Boston, and so what I'm doing right now is I work at a public school in Boston, and I do therapy with children who have significant trauma histories. They have anxiety diagnoses, depression, they have OCD, bipolar, and many of them, this is their last stop. They've been kicked out of all different schools, and because of their trauma, it's hard for them not just to learn, but to be present. And so I do therapy, I do consultation with the teachers, the guidance, the staff, and I also do psychological testing under the supervision of a psychologist to help children who, qualify for an IEP, and also to do reevaluation services. And I did before work at an OCD clinic at a hospital, and I was able to work with children all over the world that would come to this program. And I did exposure and response prevention therapy under the supervision, of course, of a psychologist. And I found it so rewarding to help the families and the children.
Wow, wow. And now you also have this consulting business for autism care. And how long has that been in place?
Yeah, so I recently opened up my consulting business a couple months ago, but I've been working for the past several years with children and adolescents who are on the spectrum, and even little kiddos as young as 2. And so for my consulting business, what I do is I provide individual coaching, and eventually I'm going to be doing group coaching. But I meet once a week with parents, and they get access to me throughout the week, and I help come up with an action plan for their children. And we focus on behavior, but we also focus on setting up the environment for success. And I also do a lot of mindset work with parents and recognizing, their parenting style and recognizing how that impacts their parenting and giving them the tools to help their child succeed and thrive. And so I love doing that work, and I'm planning to specialize in, working with children and specifically autism, but I've worked with children who have a range of diagnoses.
Awesome, awesome. So now you have had so much experience with kind of guiding and coaching parents in relation to child behavior, helping them to know the difference between what is normative, typical, kind of expected behavior, and what to do with those, but also to kind of be able to tell when something is not typical, but also how to manage the things that are not typical as well. And I imagine that doing all of this work for such a long time, you've developed some kind of tips, but also just even a general philosophy about child behavior and the things that drive child behavior. Can you tell us maybe from a, kind of that forest from the trees perspective about your philosophy on child behaviors and what kind of contributes to children acting the way that they do and doing the things that they do?
Okay, absolutely. So I think it's so normal for us as parents to focus on the behavior. But my philosophy is that when a child is having a certain behavior, whether they're hitting, yelling, having tantrums, whether they're, aggression or not, there's an underlying need behind that behavior. That I try to encourage parents to move away from the behavior and to think about what is that underlying cause, because all behavior is communication. And so when there is a behavior, it means that your child, it's functioning for them, right? It's something that they've learned as a coping strategy to get their needs. But we have to take a step back and think about what is going on. Is your child trying to tell you something? Is something happening in the home? Is something happening at school? Do they feel like they're not getting enough attention at home? And so I believe that all behavior has a function and that there are different functions for behavior, but that ultimately your child is trying to get their needs met. And as a parent, it's our job to try to meet them where they're at, to take a step back and reflect on ourselves and on our child and think about what are some things that are contributing to that behavior, and to realize when we're parenting, when a behavior comes up, that some behaviors we can ignore as long as your child is being safe. And sometimes we have to do things like planned ignoring, and we can talk about that later. But some behavior we definitely have to address.
Right. So guys, all behavior is communication. And so the key is trying to figure out what is your child trying to tell you with their behavior. And I guess, I think about, you mentioned a few things. Are they trying to tell you, did something happen? Are they trying to communicate that something happened to them? Or are they trying to communicate an emotion that they're feeling a certain way? I imagine that depending on the age of the child, their ability to describe things using words is going to be so variable. But that even regardless of the age, whenever children get emotional, they can lose some of those abilities to speak to kind of describe themselves in words. Even 15, 16-year-olds that are really great at communication, when they get really emotional upset, they can sometimes act out instead of talking about it. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think even myself, I think as parents, we often, we forget that our children's brain is still growing, and that the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that has to do with reasoning and judgment and, logic, is not going to stop growing and developing until around 25, 26. So when our child is having a tantrum or, not making the right decisions, they're still growing and they're still learning. And it's important to remember that. It's important to remember that, it's okay to have these feelings, and what do we do about it when they have certain feelings?
Right, right. So now tell us a little bit about maybe some of the other factors that sometimes we don't think about, like the environment. What factors in a home environment can also contribute to what children do and how they behave?
Okay, what a great question. So, the environment is so important because oftentimes when our child is, having a behavior, we have to think about what's going on in the environment. And we have to set up our environment for success, but realize, if there's conflict among parents, if there is yelling, if there's unstable environment going on, if your child is moving from, place to place, or if something is happening in the home, or if there's changes and transitions, then we're going to see change of behavior usually with our child. And the environment is very important. And so when I say we want to set it up for success, what I mean by that is that many times when children are having a behavior, there are things leading up to that behavior. And so before that behavior happens, we should think about what is happening before in the environment. Are we yelling at our child? When maybe they're doing something and we might be nagging them or yelling. How are we speaking with our child? Are we operating from a point where they must obey us? And so therefore we're yelling at them. And we might see our child act in ways, based on how we are acting, because we are modeling, we have to, as parents, model the appropriate behavior. And it is hard as parents because we're doing the best that we can do, but we have to model like positive behaviors and positive feelings so that our child can have the best outcome. And in our environment, we have to look at it. Is this environment that is helping your child? Are we teaching our children the correct, appropriate coping skills? Are we allowing them to feel safe? Are we allowing them to feel like they can come to us when they have a problem or when they're frustrated? Are we just sending them up to their room without explaining?
Right. And it makes me think about, you talk about things that may be happening before. It makes me think about the ABCs, which you're very familiar with from the world of autism. Can you tell us a little bit about the ABCs and kind of what some of those A's may be?
Yes, absolutely. So when we think of ABC of behavior, we realize before behavior, that's the B, before behavior, there's something called an antecedent. And what an antecedent is really everything before the behavior. So if your child, say they're yelling or they're having a tantrum, that's the behavior. But what happened before the behavior? The antecedent. So when we're trying to put our investigative hats on as parents, we should take a step back and say, little Tommy or Jimmy, they're yelling a lot, but what's happening before? Are you ignoring them or maybe busy with another child? Or are they trying to get their needs met and they don't have the right words and they're not communicating and maybe we're not being as responsive? What is happening before? And when we think about what's happening before, it could be that there's a lot of noise going on and maybe they're hungry and they need something and maybe we're not there for it. So we want to think about what is happening before the behavior and then the behavior in itself, and then after, which is the consequence. And when I say consequence, I don't mean punitive. We're not talking about consequence, can be natural. So, what is reinforcing the behavior? Because for a behavior to keep happening, whether that's tantruming, crying, hitting, it means if a behavior keeps happening, something is reinforcing, which means something is increasing the likelihood of that behavior happening again in the future. So it means that your child is getting their needs met, even if it's not in the most healthy ways. And so a consequence, so if your child, say they're hitting, and maybe the consequence is maybe you kind of walk away and we're not addressing it, right? We're not talking to them about it or doing certain things, then they might say, okay, well, I've gotten away with it this time, so now I might hit again. And so it's a consequence, depending on how we react. And I'm not saying to yell or anything like that, but depending on how we as parents are reacting, or even the natural environment, that's going to contribute to your child doing that behavior again and again. And so it's important that when we're trying to reduce the behavior, that we're also giving replacement behaviors, right? That we're giving them, instead of hitting, maybe instead of hitting little their cousin or little Timmy, maybe Johnny can hit the pillow, or he can go outside and hit something that's more appropriate, a stuffed animal, something that is not harmful, but he's still able to get his needs met, because we still want them to get their needs met, but in a way that's more safe and healthy and productive.
Wow. So one is to kind of think about what kind of need is your child trying to meet with the behavior that they're doing, and is there a healthier way to get that particular need met. So for example, if you're working with a child that has autism and there's some function to them maybe doing a particular behavior repetitively, is there a way that they can do it without hurting themselves or others? Or maybe there's a child that is just very, tired or having some other kind of emotion and it's coming out as being irritable. What if they are able to get that need met by you helping them to get the rest or whatever it is that they kind of, whatever need they have them meet that in a healthy way to kind of reduce the behavior.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And this
And
applies
go ahead.
to oh no, and this applies to everybody, even if they have a diagnosis of autism or not. ABC can apply to everyone, whether it's ADHD, autism, or just a child in general.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the B is for behavior, and that behavior is influenced by both the A and the C, what comes before and what comes after.
Mhm.
So what you do, what happens before the behavior will influence it starting, but what happens after the behavior can help it either occur again for the child to keep doing it, or for it to extinguish, for the child to stop doing it. So it sounds like when you help parents with behavior, you're looking at both sides. What are the things that happen after the behavior that may be reinforcing it and leading to the child continuing to do it over and over? Also, what the parent is doing well that's leading to extinguishing certain behaviors, but also how are things being set up for the behavior to happen in the first place? Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I also take a step, I go deeper in saying that when our child is having these behaviors, these are not necessarily a reflection of ourselves. Of course, there are things that we can do to improve, but it's okay for them to have feelings and then also to think about our mindset because these behaviors can be triggering to parents depending on how, they grew up or depending on how our parents, interacted with us. So while we're doing this, while we're looking at our children's behavior, and trying to set them up for success, it's important as parents to take a step back and to think about our own feelings. And it's okay if parents need to, take a step out of the room as long as their children is safe or use breathing exercises, anything to manage our own emotion as parents, because that can also be reinforcing to our children if they see they're getting a reaction out of us, but also just for ourselves and our well-being. It's important to think about what our children and how their actions might be playing an effect on our mental health or how we're feeling in that moment.
Oh, wow. And so, for those of you that are just joining, you're listening to Black Mental Health Matters. And today we're talking about parenting tips. And I'm here with Jasmine Akinsulire, right? Akinsulire. And we're talking about the ABCs, antecedents, behavior, consequences of child behaviors. And so, if you have a question or if you want to call in, our phone number here is 617-238-7111. And we're also streaming live on Facebook on the Facebook page, heat981fm.com. So if you want to follow along, drop a comment, even if you just want to see us, you can follow along on Facebook. So, I imagine, Jasmine, that there are folks listening and they probably have a variety of different philosophies themselves and also a variety of different approaches to parenting. What are some of the different kinds of parenting styles that you've seen that people might have? Because I imagine that there might not necessarily be kind of like a right or wrong, except it's just different styles and different ways to work with those styles. So tell me a little bit about what your thought is about that.
Okay, so there are four parenting styles that researchers have, found, and there is one parenting style that is supposed to be the research supports to be most effective,
Oh,
most
okay.
healthy for children, especially to help them with their self-esteem, how they see the world. And so I will be happy to explain all of them. So the first parenting style, I see a lot of, parents. In a lot of people say that I'm patient, but it's not that I'm patient. It's that where I'm really trying to do the work of myself as a parent. And there is one style, it's called authoritarian parenting style. And I'm not saying that if you do it as a parent that you're wrong and that it's bad, but it's so helpful to be mindful of this. So authoritarian parenting style focus on obedience and focus on control, obedience, that often a child should not be seen. I'm sorry, they should be seen but not heard. And so a lot of times a parent, if they operate from an authoritarian style, they might, for instance, if their child is yelling, they might say, be quiet, stop yelling, just go, don't yell. And instead of trying to validate their feelings or see what's going on, they might say, don't do this. Or a lot of times if they use timeout, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, they might say, go upstairs to your room, go now, instead of explaining what's going on for that. And many times authoritarian parents, when they're trying to control, they're not explaining or letting the child be part of the decision making, or allowing or many times too, every time there's a behavior, they're focusing on all of the behaviors and not letting some of the minor behaviors go, and focusing on that need for punishment, for really control. And so a lot of parents who operate in this style, what happens is their child is it's found to have low self-esteem, that the child might listen, because I have a lot of people I know personally who say, oh, this works, my child listens. It looks like they listen in that moment, but really in that moment and even down the line, they can develop aggressive behavior, hostility, and many times when they're older, they might, yeah, they might lie a lot because to avoid punishment, or they're fearing their parent. So it looks like your child is listening to you when you're controlling and really wanting them to obey, 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 but they're afraid of you. And so that is not helping their self esteem. It's not helping them, because down the road, the way they look at relationships, the way they relate to people, that will be impacted by whether their parent operated from that. And so there's, on the opposite spectrum, there's something called authoritative parenting style. And that's really where researchers find is the most effective, because parents who have authoritative parenting style, they give consequences to their child, but at the same time, they explain why they're giving it. They allow the child to engage in the problem solving techniques. They don't, for every minor behavior, focus on it. They allow their child to feel supported. They validate their child. They allow them to have feelings, but in a healthy way. But at the same time, they hold them accountable. So they're holding them accountable, but they're also providing support. And there's another style, the third one, called permissive parenting style. And so when parents are permissive, a lot of times there's no rules, there's no consistency. They're allowing their child to do really whatever they want. There's no consequence. They're more often they're their child's friends, and they're not really parenting them. And and research has shown that kids who have permissive parents are, they also can have low self-esteem. They also can have feelings of sadness. And these are, and many times they can be obese, have cavities, because their parents have left them to pretty much eat what they want and do what they want. And then lastly, there's the parenting style where it's really neglectful parenting, pretty much uninvolved parenting is what we call it. And so those parents are really, they're not involved at all, and they are really just their child is pretty much, they believe that children can teach themselves, children will learn on their own, and their children can watch whatever they watch, do whatever they do, and that leads to lots of issues with their self-esteem, lots of issues with depression. And many times, sometimes parents who might be in this category, they might have their own mental health or substance use issues, and there could be a lot of reasons why parents are falling in this style. But it's important to realize that it's not clear cut. A lot of parents can have permissive ways and authoritative ways, but it's really important to think about your parenting style and what you want for your child, how you want them to see the world, and how, when we're yelling at a kid in the authoritarian, style, how we don't like to be yelled at. How can we as adults learn and feel safe, right? And that's the same for our child. If we're yelling at them, if we're always punitive and always talking down to them, then how are they going to learn and grow and become independent and healthy beings?
Wow. Yeah. And I imagine that I feel like I've sometimes seen the parents who alternate, as you mentioned, like between permissive and authoritarian. And it's kind of like this, there's times where all of a sudden they're just trying to lay down the law and you can't talk to them and nobody can reason with them. And then other times they just kind of allow kids to do certain things. And it's almost as though they kind of hit a limit where maybe they they don't have the energy to do it anymore, and so they just then let the kid do whatever, and then once they have the energy back, they go like straight back to authoritarian again, and it's like this flip-flop between doing too much and not doing enough, and so not finding that balance. um, but I'm just going to go through them one more time. You said authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. The authoritarian is the one where the child has like zero power. There's a lot of focus on punishment, and that can lead to the child even in the future lying and basically learning how to try to get their lessons that they're learning is how to get out of trouble, because that's really the only room they have, the only window they have is just trying to escape trouble, escape punishment. Whereas authoritative will still have boundaries, will set limits, give consequences, but there is some room for the child. There's room for the child to talk, to kind of understand why things are happening. There's support provided, emotional support provided, even though the behaviors are still, they're held accountable for their behaviors. So it's not just kind of like a punishment situation, it's more of like a consequences and teaching situation. And then permissive is where this parent maybe has some difficulty setting boundaries, kind of is looking for more of a friendship versus kind of being a parent. And then that can lead to sometimes the kids not learning some of the things they need to learn, like healthy habits, because they're being allowed to do things, stay out past their bedtime, all this kind of stuff. And then the uninvolved parent who just kind of says, they'll turn out fine anyways. They don't need that close supervision. They'll be fine. And we know that children who are not well supervised, there's a whole host of things that can happen when children are not well supervised.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So then what would you suggest, if a parent is listening and they're like, oh, you know what? I just realized I am authoritarian. That is my style. What would you say for, parents listening? I mean, are there some pros and cons? Like, are there things that they can do? Because I imagine it's difficult to change your style altogether. So is there a way to kind of work with that so that you don't end up with the problems that can come along with it?
Yes. I think before we get into the tips, I think if a parent finds themselves in the authoritarian parenting style, it's important for them to take a few minutes or hopefully more and to say, why am I like this? Why do I want that control, that power from my child? And to think about their generational patterns in their families, how their parents were to them, how that made them feel, to reflect on that so that they can better understand themselves. And then to take a step further and say, how can I move forward to authoritative parenting? How can I meet my child where they're at? And there are things that you can start by doing. For instance, if you have a younger child and they're crying, or if you have an older child and they're yelling, it's okay to, yes, we want to focus on that behavior. It's not okay to yell, but we can validate their feelings. We can say, like, Johnny, Timmy, it's not okay to yell, but it's okay to be upset. It's okay to feel, to cry, but we're not going to swear at you. You're holding them accountable, but you got to validate their feelings and name that feeling, because sometimes just naming a feeling is huge. Even for adults, everybody wants to be heard. Everyone wants to be loved and seen. And children, they not only they love you, but we want to make them feel safe. So validating your child's feelings is huge. That's the first thing that you should work on. Spending one-on-one time alone, like without any interruptions, without the other child, just that one child, and really entering in their world, be entering in whatever they love. If they love trains, if they want to go to the movies, whatever it is, meeting them where they're at and doing that with them so that they can have that special time with you. Because research shows, even if you're spending 5 minutes a day, that's going to increase the positive behavior that you want to see. And then also showing them the behavior, modeling it, and showing them what you're expecting from them. Because if you're just yelling and not explaining, you're showing them what you expect, you're holding them accountable, but also providing support. And if you're giving a timeout or whatever punishment, explaining why you're doing it and allow them to do that positive behavior after. Right? We don't want to yell and nag and shame them all day long, because we have to think about how we're parenting them. How would it be if we were parented the same way, where we're getting nagged, yelled, punished all day long? And so I think doing that, spending the one-on-one time, validating those feelings, doing that inner work and thinking about why you are the way you are, though, just doing those few things, you'll see a huge improvement overall in your child's relationship and also the way they see themselves in the world.
Wow. So starting with self-reflection, to just kind of realize, where is your parenting style coming from? But also, it sounds like what you're saying is that people should kind of think about what would they have wished for in terms of how they were parented, versus just kind of thinking about, well, this is what my parents did, so I'm going to do this too. But to kind of think, well, what do I wish were different? Do I wish that my parents would have listened to me? Let me listen to my child. But also kind of I go back to this kind of phrase of like making room for the child so they feel like it's not just about discipline, that all the interactions with you are just about discipline, but some of it is just about building a positive relationship too, and just showing interest in their interests and making them feel important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the world is, especially as children of color, people of color, the world is very hard and it's hard out there. And the most safest place should be the home. That
Yeah.
environment at home, as parents, there should be no one else that can go as hard as you for your child. You have to be their supporter. You want to hold them accountable, but you also have to make them feel safe because it starts from the home. It starts from those early relationships. The early relationships are the most important, and that will determine how they're interacting with people down the line, how they feel about themselves.
So they shouldn't be feeling like they need to escape from home.
Exactly. We don't
Yeah.
want them to feel like they need to escape because the world is hard enough. And as parents, it is our job to create that safe, loving environment for them. And if it's hard for us, that's okay. There is no shame. We are all in this together doing the best that we can do. But then as parents, whether you need to get, therapist or look into family therapy because that can be so beneficial for a family. But we have to do that work for ourselves and also try to create that environment for a child to thrive in.
And so, um, maybe let's think about, because you mentioned that one of the things that parents should focus on is validating the child's emotions. And there are times where, there's behaviors going on, everybody gets heated. The child is upset, they're crying or they're emotional. The parent is upset and they're emotional and angry, and everybody's kind of upset. And so everybody's basically in emotional brain. And what are, do you ever help parents with strategies for how to get out of that place where everybody's just acting out of their emotions? What do you say to them about that?
Yes, that's great that you brought that up. So I say a lot of things. First, when your child, and we'll talk about what the parent should do for themselves, but first for
Mhm.
the child, when they are tantruming, if they're small or if they're older, if they're yelling, swearing, whatever it is, we have to realize that that part of the brain that I was speaking about before is in fight or flight response. And that means that we're not able to think logically. So often I find that parents try to reason with their child, whether it's a tantrum, whether they're arguing, they do a lot of talking, and that doesn't help when the child's their brain, they just can't process it in that moment because they're so overwhelmed. And so I tell parents, try to talk less when there is, when the child is overstimulated, when there's a lot going on, and name those feelings, but also be to focus on what you can do before that even happens. So you can do it in the moment, but really before, we should do work with that child to help them have coping strategies so that when that happens, we can help them with that meltdown, with that tantrum, with the argument if they're older, whatever it may be. And so I work on parents and I really help them with doing coping skills. So grounding techniques, a simple technique that listeners can do now or that I have people do in general is called 3-2-1 technique. And I
Yeah, why
already
don't you show us how to do it?
yeah. Yeah, so I always so it's one, it's important not to get fixed on like the 3-2-1, the order. It's okay if they mess up, if you mess up, but if you're sitting right now, I would say to close your eyes. And so one thing I would say is you can even open your eyes or close, but to think about three first to look, actually you can open your eyes and to look around and to name three things that you see. So I can see my bed, I can see a chair, the rug, three things that you see. And you can do 10 things. It's okay. Look, really take your time and look at three things. You can think about it in your head or say it out loud. And then what are two things that you can touch? So for me, I'm touching my desk, I'm touching my chair. And what is one thing that you can smell? And so this can go on. It can be one thing that you can taste, one thing that you can smell, one thing that you can see. You don't have to do it in order, but the importance of it is to ground you. So you can close your eyes, you can lean back and say, what can I hear in the room? What can I taste in my mouth, whether that's gum, your toothpaste, whatever it is. And you don't have to do 3-2-1 like that. It's just your senses to ground you, to help you. Because when we are overwhelmed, a lot of the times we're not even in the moment. We are just so overwhelmed. And it brings you back to this reality that, okay, I can touch this. All right, I can see this. And so through that technique, I encourage parents to do with themselves, with their child, and also to do breathing exercises because we really want to regulate our nervous system, but we really want to bring ourselves back to our body and to help regulate ourselves. And so with children who are small, I recognize that no little child understands to breathe in and out. So one thing you can do, there's an app. You can literally go on, if you have an iPhone, Android, you can download a birthday candle app. There are blowing bubbles apps on the phone or even on YouTube. And for young kids, I have them, practice blowing out the candles. So I'll say to my son, okay, take a deep breath in. All right, hold it, breathe out with those candles, blow it out. And we pretend, if you have real candles, fake candles, you can be imaginative. You can even draw if you don't have a phone, that's okay. And something that you can do with kids is to smell the pizza, right? Like pretend there's a pizza, you can draw it if you have pretend food and have them ask them what's their favorite kind of pizza, right? We got to be creative. And so if they like pepperoni pizza, all right, we're going to draw a pepperoni pizza or download this app that has a pizza or use a real pizza and have them take a deep breath in. All right, we're going to smell that pepperoni pizza and breathe out. We got to blow it. It's really hot. Blow it. And so being imaginative and creative, that's fun for your child, but also it's helping them breathe in and breathe out. And that is something that they can use when they're having a tantrum or dysregulated. And if they're an older child, they can do that technique where they're looking around the room, thinking about what's in front of them. And they can even do guided imagery, right? Like having them think about a safe place that they go to, a place that makes them feel safe, whether that's the ocean, their room, Hawaii. They can visualize it. And and close their eyes and what do they see in that place? What do they smell? What do they taste? Can they feel the sand on their feet? Can they hear the seagulls, right? And really sitting back, having their feet planted, closing their eyes if they feel safe, and imagining because visualization is so important. And they can begin to use breathing exercises. And so when they're dysregulated, we can prompt them to use those coping skills. And there's no one size fits all. Some of these skills might not work, but we have to try and we have to see what works. And it's important to try before they're dysregulated, before the argument, before the tantrum. It's important to try these with your children.
Wow, no, that's amazing. So there's different things that kids can try. What are some things that parents can do?
Okay, so for parents, first, a parent, it's important to, before they're even trying to do that mindset work, to tell themselves inside that this is not a reflection of who they are, that their child can have these feelings, and to detach themselves from their child's feelings. Because your child is feeling overwhelmed, it doesn't mean you have to take on those feelings. So to really focus on that mindset of, all right, my child is real right now having a lot of anxiety, but I don't have to have anxiety. I can maintain calmness. And so parents, they can, do the breathing, right? They can sit back. If they can't, they can stand up. And I always encourage them to breathe in through their nose and hold it for a few seconds and then slowly exhale. And when they're exhaling their children's feelings, right? They're detaching, they're exhaling the stress. And they can do those breathing exercises a few times. Or parents, if your child is safe, they're not hurting themselves or others, and they are safe, it's okay for a few seconds to leave that room and to regroup, to tell your child, whether they're older or younger, as long as they're safe at a safe age, to say that right now I need a minute and I'll be right back, because that's modeling that it's okay to take a break, right? And then you come back, right? Take a break. And then a parent needs to be easy on themselves and to realize that it's okay to feel overwhelmed as a parent. Those feelings are normal. And what can we do about it? So whether it's breathing, doing those 3-2-1 exercises, taking a step back, or letting your child know what you need in that moment, that you need to take a deep breath, you need to take a step back. Those are things I really try to focus on parents. What works for them, whether it's having a grounding rock, if there's a rock, or something for sensory needs for parents to help ground them. It's very important for parents to work on their mindset and work on their coping skills just as much as children.
So then is this something that they would do then before talking about consequences? They would, like, everybody gets regulated first and
Yes.
then talk about, okay, what happened? Let's talk about what the consequences are and all of that.
Yes, because it's hard, right? Even for me, it's hard as parents. It's hard because we're overwhelmed. We're just like, go upstairs, go to your room, and it's okay. We're none of us are perfect, and I'm not perfect. We all make mistakes, but the more we practice, it will be easier and easier. But you're right, because our brains we cannot think logically and access that part of our brain when we are overwhelmed with a flight of feelings and emotions, right? So it's important for parents to take a step back, breathe for a few seconds, be in the moment, ground yourself, let your child ground yourself before there can be any consequence, because that's not helpful. A child is not going to learn and understand with you yelling at them, with everyone yelling. So once that is done, then you can move into, thinking about what the consequence will be for your child, and explain it to them. Absolutely.
Wow, wow. And for those of you guys that are just joining, you're listening to Black Mental Health Matters, and today we're talking about parenting tips. I'm Dr. Kerryann Williams, and my guest today is Jasmine, and she is a doctoral student at William James College. And if you guys have any questions or comments, you can give us a call at 617-238-7111. That's 617-238-7111. We're also streaming live on Facebook on heat981fm.com. So you mentioned that they're strategies that you can use for older kids as well as for younger kids. So for older kids, you know, what would you do to help them kind of decompress? What if you said something like, nope, you can't go to this, you can't go over to your friend's house, or you can't use the internet past a certain time, or you have to turn your phone in, and this teenager gets really upset? Because I feel like that's a scenario
Yes,
that
yes,
it's like happening all the time, is
absolutely.
that this, child feels entitled to their cell phone, and when you try to set limits, they act like the world is falling apart. Um, what do you say for helping parents to kind of address some of the, I guess, those emotions? Do they let some of them go? Do they kind of like wait until the child is regulated before they start to kind of talk to them again? Because I wonder, for teens, at some point they need to learn a little bit of self
Of course.
like regulation too. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's great. I think back to my mom and when I was a teenager, my parents, and my mom did a great job with that. I think about in general, like your child, yes, the teenager, you want them to learn self-regulation skills. We want them to be happy teenagers, but we also want to give them the skills, right? And so I think back that before you even tell your child, whether it's the phone, like what you said, going to bed or on time, whatever it is that you want your teenager to know, before you're saying, no, give me the phone, like we should, whenever you want, if whether it's the phone, whatever it is, tell your child before, right? The day before, if you want to start making them go to bed early, don't say on that day when they've been going to bed at this time for years or months. Give them time, tell them in advance, right? Tell them before you even say, explain your logic. Why do they have to give the phone up at this time? Why do they have to shut the TV off? Explain that, okay, well, in order to grow, right, in order to be healthy, this is why, but also allow them to problem solve with you. It's not that we're bending our will or being permissive, but let them be part of the conversation and try to meet them where they're at. Try to make a consequence or a time that is fair for them, right? We don't expect teenagers to go to bed at 6. So like we want to make sure that it makes sense for them, makes sense for you and your family. Ask their thoughts because we want to validate their feelings. Tell them you understand you were once a teenager and you know it is hard, because we were all teenagers once. We need to be transparent. We need to be honest with them and validate their feelings of frustration. Allow them to have those feelings in a healthy way, and allow them to come in and problem solve and be part of that team, that conversation. And I think that's just very important to do.
Wow. And no, I think about some folks, not everybody, but some folks in the Black community. A lot of us have been raised with kind of the mindset of, listen, you just need to listen to me. I'm not trying to be your friend. Like, you just need to do what I tell you to do. I shouldn't have to explain myself. You know what? What do you think about this kind of? I guess in some ways, like almost like a generational thing of, this is what parenting is supposed to be. You shouldn't have to be necessarily doing all this extra stuff. Just tell them what to do. They should do it. And if they don't, consequence. Um, what do you say to that?
I know lots of people, lots of close people who are like that. And the thing about that is, And I recognize that. I recognize it's a generational pattern. I recognize that our parents did that for us, and our parents did the best that they could do, right? I feel like most parents want the best for their kids. And so I acknowledge that. It's important to acknowledge that. But to take it a step further and think, our parents, there are mistakes that we want the best for our child, and our parents made some mistakes, and we should take what is the best from our parents and then what they did, for instance, whether it was like what you just said, like that need for, well, I'm not your friend. I need to, I don't need to explain. We should acknowledge that. And at the same time, I agree, like we're not there to just be our child's friend, like, right? We have to have rules and structure, but at the same time, we want them to feel loved and supported and safe and trust. Like that's important. And that has nothing to do with being a friend. As a parent, we need to be a safe place, not a dictator. And so what I tell parents who feel like that is I tell them to think about what kind of child that your child will be in the future. If your child isn't having room to grow, to learn, and to feel safe about asking, why a rule is, or, your thought process, or wanting to be involved with problem solving skills, or in general, and if they were stifled, their personality, right? They couldn't ever cry. How is that going to be for them? They're most likely going to develop anxiety, depression, mental health diagnoses, and even substance use disorders. If at home, all they dealt with was, you must do this, you do that, you do this. It's not good for it's not just their personality, it's not good for their mental health. So you need to think as a parent, how can you take a step further and learn from your parents, but how can you create that environment for your child so that they can have success, right? Not just now, but in the future. And to take a step back, I tell parents a lot of times who are there in that style, they feel like they might not have the patience, or that their child is working for them. They say it's working for them and that I'm just so patient. But I say, no, 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 it's working for you because your child is afraid. They fear you. Like if I say, oh, I'm gonna call your parents and that, they're afraid. Like we don't, are we operating out of fear? You have to think about your parenting style. Is it that your goal for your child is to be afraid? Or do you want to have a child that's gonna be successful in the future and feel safe and comfortable? And what kind of parent do you want them to be? So that's what I tell parents. I encourage them to just think about that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as you know, I work with kids that have behavioral problems, and sometimes what ends up happening is it starts off where it seems like that method is working, and then eventually the kids kind of turn.
Yeah.
And there's kind of they come to this point where they're like, I have nothing left to lose. I have nothing left for you to take away from me. I'm not listening to you
Yes.
anymore. I'm not
Yes.
afraid of you anymore. And so there's a sense of like, what do you do when fear doesn't work anymore? And then a lot of times parents get stuck because fear-based parenting it's not necessary. It's kind of one-dimensional. So what would about, if there are parents listening that are thinking, okay, I kind of get it. I need to be spending some additional time with my kids. I need to build up that relationship. What are some ways that, parents can spend that one-on-one time? Like, are they going to go play basketball with their teenager, or are they going to go to the mall? Or, what are some things that parents can do with the older, I guess, because we talked about the younger kids a little bit, you can kind of play and things like that. But with the older kids, what can we do to help them to feel like there's a space for them to talk about what's important to them, and it's not a space where they're in trouble, or they're, it's kind of like, what's the adolescent version of one-on-one time?
Yes, so I think back to what my mom used to do with me when I was an adolescent. It's just like one special Fridays. We would go to different restaurants because I love to go to different restaurants. I always encourage the parents of older kids to not just watch movies, although it's great. Nothing wrong if your child likes movies, but to really try to do some games, some interaction. So if it is movies, that's okay. But whether your child likes board games or whether they like to go shopping, all right, go with them to some stores. This is a great time to have that bonding experience. If they like basketball, you might be bad at basketball, but try dribbling some, shooting some hoops. Whether it's tennis, going outside for a walk, I used to love to do. If you're a girl, painting, or man, any, depending, like if your teenager likes to get their nails done, it can be anything, and it doesn't have to cost money. I mean, you can go to the park with them and go to a free park, right? You can, if you have a pool, go swimming with them. It could be at your house. If you have a trampoline, go on the trampoline. It could be anything, really, anything that your child is interested in. If they're older and they like to draw, okay, start drawing with them. Ask them to show you for them to show you their drawings. If it's music, That's free. You guys can both sit on YouTube and look at their music. You have to meet them where they're at and enter their world, no matter what their interest is, as long as it's, safe and appropriate. I always tell parents to do that with your child, at least for 5 minutes a day. If you can't, okay, but try at least 5 minutes a day. And the more and more time, you'll see that your child will develop a healthy, happier relationship with you. Because
Yeah,
children love to be heard.
I like the phrase when you said you have to kind of like enter their world. I think that's maybe one of the key things actually with some of the differences in parenting styles is that that difference of entering their world, of kind of thinking about, okay, what, not just what do they need, but yet what do they need, but also what are they going through? What are they experiencing? What do they think? And what's going on in their social lives, what's going on in their, school lives or whatever. Because if they come in, they come home from school and you're like, how was your day? They're just going to say fine, but it's when you're doing an activity
Mhm.
together that sometimes they just start talking. When you're doing
Yes.
an activity together, all of a sudden they're like, what do you think about so and so? Why do you ask? Because so and so said this. And it's like, well, they would never have said that to you if you just got in the car and said, how was your day? They were not going to talk about that. But if you're doing an activity together, all of a sudden they think it's a great time to bring this stuff up. You know?
Absolutely. And some teenagers like to talk more in the car. It just depends. Whatever, you'll notice that your child will talk more whether they're doing this activity or in the car and what setting, and you just go from there. And of course, children like and teenagers, they it might change their interest, but it's nice to see what they're interested in today. It could change tomorrow. And even if it's like cooking together, sometimes some teenagers they don't want to be staring at their parent. They might just side by side cooking and they might start to talk more. It's just really no pressure. And we don't want to drill them with questions. We don't want this to be overwhelming. This could be an opportunity for them to teach you a skill, something that they like. And that's nice for parent for teach kids to be able to be the
Yeah.
teachers.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's underestimated is that when kids have a chance to teach adults something, they
Yeah,
love it so much. And they also do like the side by side. Like I think there's something about direct eye contact that's a little bit kind of overwhelming. But if you're doing an activity and you're not looking directly at each other, kids are more likely, I think, to open up about certain things. Um, I one of the things you had mentioned much earlier on was something about like not kind of bringing things up over and over. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I know sometimes, a kid or a teenager, they might get something wrong. The family has spoken about it, they've talked about it, they've gotten their consequence, the consequence is over, but somehow the parent keeps bringing it up. Remember when you did this? Remember when you did that? Da da da. What is there a role for kind of just like letting go of certain things? And what do you think about that?
I think even myself, we all fall in that trap, right? Of like wanting to keep saying it over and over and drilling it in our child, our teenager. But I think we have to think about what is the purpose for that, right? Like, who is that serving? Is that serving us to keep saying it over and over so that we can feel like we're pounding it and drilling it into our teenager, into our child? Or is it really in their best interest to say it over and over? Because it will become so repetitive. And that could be, depending on what you're saying over and over, it can be shaming them. Be like, why did you do this? Don't do this. You keep doing this over and over. That can play into their self esteem, their feelings of safety, or it could just be really annoying and that can ruin the relationship that you have with your child. So I always tell parents if there is something, of course, that your teenager, your child is doing that, is harmful or something that really needs to change, absolutely address it. Come up with a plan for it. Tell your child the expectations in your household, reinforce it, be consistent. But then after, if they're not engaging in that behavior, let them engage in the positive behavior. And if they're not doing what, that negative behavior, that behavior you don't want them to do, then you have to move forward. Because if they're not doing it, there's no need to keep hashing it over and over. And if you feel like you have to, maybe say it in your own head, right? Go outside and say it to yourself, write it down to get it out of your mind. But try not to do it because what I encourage parents, and this is what authoritative parents do, is to focus on the positive behaviors and traits. So
Mm.
many times our kids are doing amazing things and we're only focusing on their negative behavior. So if your teenager is doing the dishes and they usually don't do the dishes, or if they're just being so awesome, doing great in school, doing good at home, or if you're a little child, or if you have a younger child and they're doing something great, playing with their sibling, focus on that. Literally, that's positive reinforcement, right? And give that praise. Verbal praise is so important. And be specific, like good job on doing these dishes, good job on, playing with your sister, because children, you don't just say good job because they're not going to know what they're doing a good job for. Be
Yeah.
specific, give that praise, because it helps with their self-esteem, but it also helps them know, like, yes, I'm doing something, and focus
Right.
on the positive things, because you can ignore some of that negative behavior. Focus on the positive behavior, and you will see your child will want more of that praise,
Yeah.
because we as
Yeah.
parents are so reinforcing for our child.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I like that. What a way to end the show today. Focus on the positive. Try to draw out what's good, because so often we focus on all the negative, trying to get things to be better. And it's so important to highlight the things that are great as well, and highlight the strengths. So I want to thank you so much, Jasmine, for joining us today for the show. You guys can connect with Jasmine on Instagram at Global Autism Parent Consultant. And her website is globalautismconsultant.com. And you guys can join me again next week for Black Mental Health Matters, Sundays at 1 p.m. on 98.1 FM, The Urban Heat. So I will talk with you again next week.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show today. And tune in again next Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for more on Black mental health. And connect with me on Instagram at drkerryann, as well as on Twitter at drkerryann. And you can also go to my website, drkerryann.net. So hope to connect with you soon. Bye.